square root of 5, yeah. You should have come up with a square root of 5. All right, so you should come up with a square root of 5 when you did your Pythagorean theorem. All right, so any questions? Again, don't forget to put those negative signs. You're in quadrant 3. The only two positive trig functions, going back to your all students take calculus, is the tangent and the cotangent. So like I've done before, sine of theta. Sine of theta is the opposite over adjacent, so that's negative 1 over square root 5. The cosine of theta is negative 2 over square root 5. Now, if you want to, you can rationalize, or what makes these a little bit nicer than the sum and difference, if you don't rationalize these denominators, when you go to multiply them, which you will, or square the fractions, the radicals are going to disappear on their own. But if you wanted to, it's kind of an eeny, meeny, miny, mo. You can use the rationalized form if you want to. You'll get the same answer in the end. But for the double angles, I use the fractions before I rationalize the denominator. Make sure it'll give you a simpler answer. So now I'm going to find the sine of 2 theta. So the sine of 2 theta, remember, is the 2 sine theta, cosine theta. So remember, 2 is actually a fraction over 1. Times. Take out sine theta, replace it with the ratio, which I'm going to use the negative 1 over square root 5. Times the cosine theta, which is the negative 2 over square root 5. Multiply straight across. 2 times negative 1 times negative 2 is going to give me a positive 4. Over 1 times square root 5 times square root 5, what's this denominator going to look like? That's just going to be a what? 5. So there's your sine of 2 theta. Cosine of 2 theta is the cosine squared theta minus sine squared theta. Again, cosine theta we found to be negative 2 over square root 5, and remember, I'm going to square that entire ratio. Minus sine squared theta. Again, I found the sine to be negative 1 over square root 5, and again, I've squared it. We talked about you want to square the numerator and square the denominator. So when I square negative 2, what's the numerator going to look like? That's going to give me a positive 4. When I square the square root of 5, that's going to give me a 5. Minus. When I square negative 1, that's going to give me a 1. When I square the square root of 5, that's going to give me a 5. So 4/5 minus 1/5 gives me a 3/5. So there's your cosine double angle. You guys go ahead now and tell me what the tangent of 2 theta is going to be. Again, remember, that's just taking your sine of 2 theta and dividing it by the cosine of 2 theta. What'd you guys get for the tangent double angle? 4/3. Okay? So any questions on using those double angle formulas? Okay? All right. So now take a look at number 3. So sometimes, ladies and gentlemen, this kind of goes back to Unit 1. We did a little bit of trig tic-tac-toe. Sound a little familiar? We did that trig tic-tac-toe. Sometimes they're not going to necessarily give you angle measurements to get the location. They'll just give you this single inequality. So let's talk about what this cosine of theta greater than 0 means. So when I'm greater than 0, what does that tell you? Are we positive or negative? Positive. So this is only going to narrow us down to 2 quadrants. So going back to your all students take calculus, where is cosine positive? Cosine's positive where? Quadrant 4 and quadrant 1. So I know right away I cannot be located in quadrant 2 or quadrant 3. So I can eliminate those two. This is now where you've got to look at the sign of the ratio that they are giving you. So they're telling you cosecant, which is reciprocal of which function? Sine. So they're telling you that sine and cosecant are negative. So out of quadrants 1 and quadrant 4, where is cosecant and sine negative? 4. So again, I've got to be in quadrant 4. So any questions on why I am located in quadrant 4? So I'll draw my triangle down here. So now again, cosecant is reciprocal to sine, so I know the sine of theta, if I take the reciprocal of this, is negative 1 over square root 3. So by your SOHCAHTOA, what sides of the triangle does negative 1 over square root 3 represent? That represents the opposite over the what? Hypotenuse. So the opposite side is a negative 1. The hypotenuse is square root of 3. You guys go ahead, use your Pythagorean theorem, and tell me what that other side's going to be. What'd you guys get? Square root of 2? Do I need a negative sign in front of the square root of 2? No. So now, I know the sine ratio. Let me go ahead and set up the cosine ratio. Cosine, remember, is the adjacent over the hypotenuse. That's going to be square root of 2 over square root 3. Again, if you want to rationalize, go ahead, but as you're seeing, you're squaring the fractions and multiplying. The radicals are going to take care of themselves. So you don't need to worry about rationalizing the denominator here. Sum and difference, I always do them first because you're adding and subtracting them. All right, so you guys now go ahead for me. Find your sine of 2 theta, cosine of 2 theta, and then the tangent of 2 theta. So you guys go ahead now and finish that for me. Go ahead and find those 3 for me. So this is what you should come up with when you're finished. Again, don't forget your negatives. Again, that's why you want to make sure that you've got the negative signs when you set the sine and cosine originally. Any questions, guys, on how I found the sine, cosine, or tangent double angles? Austin, yeah.
Why is it negative?
Because remember, the sine ratio is negative because we're in quadrant 4, remember. So sine is negative originally. So when I set up the sine of theta as negative 1 over square root 3, it's 2 times the sine of theta times the cosine of theta. So the sine ratio is negative, so that's why it has to be negative. Okay? Are you all right, Austin, on why that one's negative?
So you can't multiply 2 and square
No. Remember, you can only multiply numbers that are under radicals together, numbers that are not under radicals together. I call it a mix and match sale. You can't mix and match the numbers under radicals with numbers that are not under radicals. It's not a mix and match sale. Numbers that are outside you can multiply. Numbers that are under radicals you can multiply, but you can't combine them. Okay? Are we good? Okay?
Question.
Yep.
From the start, how did you find the hypotenuse as -1?
The hypotenuse is not -1. The hypotenuse is not -1. The opposite side is -1.
Yeah, how did you get the hypotenuse as square root of 3?
Pythagorean theorem, which is what I did over here.
So it says
Because you're given the cosecant. So when I take the reciprocal of the cosecant, that's the sine function, which is -1 over square root 3. That's the reciprocal of negative square root 3. Okay, guys. Last problem. First of all, you do your trig tic-tac-toe. Tell me, first of all, if you can figure out, take a minute, guys, take a minute, and see if you can figure out the location of where you are. Remember, turn your GPSs on. Location, location, location. You've got to know the location of where we are. So given that information, see if you can come up with where we're going to be located. Because if you get the quadrant wrong, you're going to get your signs wrong, which means your answers are probably going to be wrong. So you've got to make sure you get that location correct. So sine less than 0, what two quadrants can I narrow it down to? 3 and 4. Because all students, sine is positive in 1 and 2, so I can narrow it down to 3 and 4. Cotangent is what? Positive or negative? Positive. So out of quadrants 3 and 4, where is cotangent positive? 3. So I've got to be in the third quadrant. So are we okay on why we're in the third quadrant? So they're giving me that the cotangent of theta is 5. So I know that the tangent of theta is 1/5. So by your SOHCAHTOA, what sides of the triangle are represented? Tangent represents the opposite over the what? Adjacent. So my opposite side is 1, my adjacent side is 5. Do I need negative signs in front of any of them? Both of them. So now you guys go ahead and use your Pythagorean theorem and tell me what the hypotenuse is going to be. All right, so again, guys, we got this. Now that I know all three sides of my triangle, I'm going to go ahead and set up the sine of theta. So sine of theta from my triangle is the opposite over hypotenuse. So I'm going to have a negative 1 over square root 26. The cosine of theta is the adjacent over the hypotenuse, which is negative 5 over square root 26. So last problem, you guys now go ahead and find the sine, cosine, and tangent double angle. Okay, guys. So this is what you should get. For the sine double angle, so the sine double angle, I come up with 5 over 13. Yes, you do have to reduce 10 over 26. Divide out your 2. The cosine double angle, I end up with 12 over 13. Again, I come up with 24 over 26. Make sure you simplify that. Divide out the 2. And then the tangent is the sine divided by the cosine, which is 5 over 12.
Wait, do we just ignore the 2 theta on the sine over cosine?
Well, the sine of 2 theta is where I got the 5 over 13 from. So I didn't ignore it. I'm using the sine of 2 theta. Sine of theta would be just the ratio from the triangle. Sine of 2 theta is what I come up with once I plug it into the sine double angle formula. So I didn't ignore it. I used the double angle formula to get 5 over 13. Sine of theta comes right from the triangle itself. Sine of 2 theta is what I come up with after I use my double angle formula. So any questions, guys, on those? All right, ladies and gentlemen, your homework for tonight. Guys, since we have issues listening to me about homework, the homework tonight, please pay attention. Write it down. You have this missing page that was out, that I gave out last class. That's that 4.2 day 2 missing page. Those are the last set of problems we went over that involved the sum and difference with a triangle and unit circle. So you have that page as well as page 10 and 11 in your homework packet, which is the double angle formulas. All right? So any questions about what your homework is due for me for Monday? So like I said, guys, we're done Unit 4, so we'll review Monday. Test is going to be on Wednesday. All right, so we're done Unit 4.